1984. It's a big year. Let's get to it. So, welcome to My Life in Film 1984, and this is a heck of a year. Shortlisting all this, it's not a shortlist, to put it simply. So maybe we should just get straight on with things and just start off, as always, with a look at the top 10 from 1984. We've got Beverly Hills Cop, Ghostbusters, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Gremlins, Karate Kid. I say karate, you say karate. Let's call the whole thing off. Police Academy, Footloose, Romancing the Stone, Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, and Splash. And across that list, there's only one that I've not seen, which I'll talk about later. News for this year, Disney launched their Touchstone Pictures. The brand was launched to give more mature subject matter a chance for the studio to give output to. TriStar Pictures, which was a Columbia production, released their first film in April this year, and breakdancing sadly became a big thing worldwide. At the Oscars, Amadeus was the main winner, whilst over at the BAFTAs, The Killing Fields was the high scorer. And the first Razzies reflected on the years of 1984 when it took place at the start of 1985, with Bolero scoring well in all the worst categories. Anyway, let's get on to the films that stood out for me through my life. First of all, we've got Greystoke, The Legend of Tarzan. Now, I've always loved Tarzan stories, always been fascinated by Edgar Rice's Burroughs character. From the TV serials that I used to watch growing up to every big screen adaptation, there's something about the character that I love, and this one saw Christopher Lambert as Tarzan, and Andy McDowell and Ian Holm co-starring alongside. It's a great production, and I flocked to it when it came out. I flocked to it, I took to it, and I loved the fact that it was adapting the story closer to the actual novel was than what all the interpretations that I'd seen up to that point. Because all the interpretations up to that point took a more loose approach to Tarzan swinging through the jungle like and all that stuff. You know what I'm talking about. Whereas this adapted the book, and for me at the time, this was the first time that I'd encountered this story as it was. It's a great film, worth checking out. Next we've got Once Upon a Time in America. Now, I've always got a love for gangster films, especially ones set pre-1950s, and this is possibly one of the most lavish and epic of them all. I didn't get to see this until the 90s, when it was shown on, I think, probably Channel 4 or somewhere as part of a season of films that they were doing. And this came from the creator Sergio Leone. You might recognise his name from a certain spaghetti western starring Clint Eastwood. Well, with this, it had De Niro, James Woods, Joe Pesci, and it tells the story of Noodles, played by De Niro, a former Prohibition gangster who returns to New York to confront his past. A score, as always with Leone's films, by Ennio Morricone. Absolutely sweeping, grand tale, which it has a heck of a runtime, but it flies by because it's so engrossing. The characters are great. This is the definitive Prohibition era gangster movie, as far as I'm concerned. 16 Candles. John Hughes debuted with a film starring Molly Ringwald about a girl who turns 16, finds that her family have kind of forgotten that she almost exists. Well, they forgot her birthday at least, and is trying to find her way in life. Hughes sets his stall out early. He's got a lot of his key players that you'll see coming in further films of his, and he's got the same wit and charm that his scripts have got. There's some elements that are a bit cringy these days, but it's still a solid outing for a first-time director, and Ringwald is absolutely charming throughout. She became a crush round about this area, and I've still got a bit of a crush on her now. What can I say? She's a lovely lady. I'm going to mention Starman. Now, I know that my general rule of thumb is that if I've only recently watched it, it didn't really impact on me during my life when it came out. But I just want to mention Starman because I was given this as one of the Oscar-nominated films that I've not seen by my co-host Lee earlier this year, and it's another John Carpenter film that I'd missed, and I've got no idea why it missed. What a brilliant film. Jeff Bridges is an alien in a human body trying to get home. It's basically an adult E.T. Marvellous. If you've not watched Starman, get it checked. It didn't impact on me through my life, but it was an oversight that I've corrected recently. In the action stakes, we had Beverly Hills Cop. Eddie Murphy is on solid form as Axel Foley, a foul-mouthed and extremely funny buddy cop movie. It still works well today. The Beverly Hills Cop series, well, the first two films, are enjoyable treats. This was a time when Eddie Murphy was really on fire. He was sizzling on the screen. He was a big name. He'd become something that would draw people in. And Beverly Hills Cop, everything about it, the style, the presentation, the soundtrack, all gel together to give one of the best buddy cop movies of the 80s. Following in the footsteps of the Indiana Jones series, obviously everyone wanted to try to do all the action-adventure things. You had Alan Quatermain films we're getting tapped into. Well, we have Romancing the Stone, which saw Kathleen Turner as a romance novelist who ends up embroiled in a rollicking adventure which involves kidnapping, treasure maps, and dangers. Michael Douglas and Danny DeVito on board, Michael Douglas being the key romantic lead and Danny DeVito being the rather scheming, double-crossing, comedy sidekick-esque kind of person. It's a fun adventure. It spawned a sequel which wasn't as good, but this one, yeah, it was a good attempt to tap into that Indiana Jones energy. Not as good as the Indiana Jones series, but still close. The Terminator. Now, what could be said about the Terminator that hasn't been said before? Nothing, so maybe I should just move on. No, I still think that the Terminator is the best of the Terminator films. I love the rawness of it. I know that Terminator 2 polished up the effects and had some like sizzling moments, but Terminator 2 was basically just a rehash of the Terminator. This one, James Cameron, with his sci-fi tale of robots from the future sent back to kill the mother of the resistance leader. Michael Biehn as the resistance soldier who's sent back to try to protect Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton. It's a great sci-fi, great time travel adventure, marvellous action sequences, and some stop motion that, I mean, I love me stop motion, and there's some stop motion of the robots later on, the Terminator, that stands out. It's also notorious for Arnie's presence on screen being the huge motivating factor, the huge captivating element. His limited lines of dialogue played beautifully, and it's a film that definitely stands up today. It stands up a lot better than most of the films that followed it. And I mentioned last time about Jackie Chan with Project A. Well, we've got another one of Jackie Chan's favourites came out this year, Wheels on Meals. Chan and Sammo Hung are mobile restaurant owners who find themselves pitted against an evil gang, and it's more fun, comedy, karate. Brilliant. Combination that you can't beat. Early Chan from around this area are all immensely rewatchable, immense fun, and well worth checking out. Everything from when he went to America kind of fell a bit. There were a few examples that stood out as okay, but that's as best as I'll go. We'll get to them when we get to those years. Right, I mentioned at the head of the show about breakdancing became a thing, and it became such a thing this year that two movies, Breaking and Breaking 2, otherwise known as Breakdance and Breakdance 2 Electric Boogaloo, both came out. Yes, two breakdancing films in 1 year. And they're not good. They were just an excuse to have a comical, loose plot about a breakdancing tournament and just showcase loads of people doing robot dancing and like caterpillars and nonsense like that. These films resulted in pretty much every school kid thinking that they were an expert breakdancer and flinging themselves on the floor and just having strange, weird spasms. I've never understood breakdancing. I've never got why it's a fascination. Just like I don't understand street dancing these days. I don't get it. Maybe. For me, dancing is headbanging and knocking and pogoing and sending people to the ground. That's about it. Anyway, Breaking and Breaking 2, I watched them when I was young. I've never watched them again. I've got no intention of. One film that I have watched multiple times, watched when I was young, absolutely loved it, watched it pretty much every week for a year in my later teens, and I still go back to it very, very regularly today, and that is This Is Spinal Tap. The best mockumentary ever. Marty DeBerge is a documentary maker who is following the legends that are Spinal Tap as they tap into America. David St. Hubbins, Derek Smalls, Nigel Tufnell, three legendary creations, and Guest, McKean and Shearer portray them beautifully. A lot of the script was improvised around and played with on set, and it was made to feel as real as a normal documentary. And it worked to such a degree that for a few years I actually thought it was a documentary about a rather inept band. That's how effective it was as I was a kid. And they kind of became a band as a result of it. And there's been tours, there's been follow-ups. The Blu-ray of this and the DVD are well worth picking up because the deleted scenes are all mashed together into an additional film, which is well worth seeing because even the deleted scenes could have fit into the main film without feeling out of place. It's all an absolute joy. And also on the DVD and Blu-ray, they've got a commentary by the band, as the band, about how Marty DeBerge showed them in the wrong light. Brilliant. The comedy in here is perfect, and it's the fact that the cast got so into the roles that makes it work. The whole film is a hilarious joy that is a pleasure to consistently go back to. I mean, if you could scale films on 1 to 10, this, you know what I'm about to do, goes to 11. Over in the sci-fi and fantasy department, oh boy did we have a year. Let's start with 1984 because that's the year that we're in. Yes, Orwell's novel is brought to dark life with John Hurt and Richard Burton in his final role. The story of a humble citizen in a totalitarian state whose life comes under scrutiny from Big Brother is a powerful tale packed with warnings and analogies that we clearly haven't paid attention to. If you look around the world today, we maybe should be reading this book a lot more at school. I don't think it gets covered enough. Anyway, this was the first adaptation of it that I actually saw, thanks to it getting run on TV, or it might have been a VHS rental a year or two later. And I genuinely believe that it is the finest of the outputs. John Hurt is always fantastic, and Richard Burton in his final role is marvellously cast. It's a great dystopian future film. If you've never seen it, get it watched. Learn some life lessons. Speaking of other years, 2010. The sequel to 2001 A Space Odyssey came out this year, and Roy Scheider is sent to find out what happens to the original mission. It's kind of forgotten by many people, but there's a lot to favour in this film. There's the furthering of Bowman's evolution from the end of the previous film. We get to learn exactly what the Ghost Child element was about and where he is on the evolutionary scale now. And the mystery of the monolith is explored further, albeit without full explanations. It's overlooked, sadly, because the first is such a iconic film that people leave it at there. Check out 2010 if you've never watched it. Whilst it's nowhere near the same grandiose of 2001 A Space Odyssey, it's a marvellous continuation of the tale, and it's only a shame that we never got to see any further continuations, which there were in books, but they were never adapted to film. A film that was adapted and is being readapted and will eventually come out once this COVID thing has died down is Dune. Frank Herbert's novel is brought to bizarre life by David Lynch in a film that's stylistically beautiful, muddlingly confusing, and taps into themes and ideas of the novel, yet discards chunks of it thanks to rather heavy editing that was forced on Lynch, resulting in a bit of a mess of a film, but a mess that I'm drawn to. I saw this when it first came out. I also had the sticker album. I collected all the stickers for it. It's a film that sparked my love of the books. I hadn't read the book until I watched this film, and then I watched this film, went to the library, got out Dune, read Dune, and then worked through the whole series, and I've loved them ever since. The cast are marvellous. Cal MacLachlan is fantastic as Paul Atreides. You've got Patrick Stewart in there, you've got Virginia Madsen, you've got Brad Dourif, you've got Dean Stockwell and Max von Sydow, and not forgetting Sting in his plastic underpants. Yes, Sting was in this as Fade, and whilst he's very dismissive of the role these days, and it's one of those images that gets mocked a lot, similar to the Sean Connery one with Zardoz, which people mock a lot who clearly haven't seen the film. I think he was well placed as Fade. He didn't have a lot to do, to be honest, but I think he had like that. He's supposed to be a beautiful specimen of humanity, and I think he really represented that, and he looks like he could hold himself in a fight, which is one of the key things. The editing that Lynch was forced to do is what kept the runtime down and clearly impacts on the end result, but visually and stylistically it's pretty good sci-fi, well worth checking out. Just don't expect perfection. We're expecting perfection when the new adaptation comes, aren't we? We are. Electric Dreams. Following the theme that we had last year with the computers almost starting nuclear war, we now have a love triangle film with a man, a woman, and a computer. Yes, a story that is clearly 30 years ahead of its time, with a computer showing far more AI than was ever possible on a humble 32k RAM machine. But hey, why let that get in the way of a fun rom-com about, a computer who gets jealous that a guy has started seeing a girl? It's not a great film, but it does have some affable charm to it, and it's one that if it's on and there's nothing else to watch, give it a check. I watched it. I was obsessed with anything to do with computers at that point in time, regardless of how good or bad the quality was. And this was one of the ones that was mid-range quality, and I did watch it a few times over my developing years. We mentioned Indiana Jones before. Indy was back this year in a proper sequel. Well, it wasn't a sequel, it was a prequel. It's Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, set before the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark. You have Harrison Ford back as Indy, and buddied up with a young companion, Short Round. He ends up with an annoyingly grating, screaming woman, Willie, with him. And you've got a mystery about some sacred stones that have been taken and will grant power to whoever manages to get the whole lot of them. And Indy gets embroiled in it to try to recover them. Kids in mines, Mola Ram, hearts getting ripped out of people's chests. It's just fantasy territory, and it's not as good as the first film. It's not as good as Raiders, and it's not as good as the film that would come next, but it's still a good, entertaining diversion. And the song and dance number at the beginning is well worth 5 minutes of your time. It's fun and energetic. It's got good comic timings. The Indiana Jones series, all three of them were good, and I did say all three of them. There's a film that came out this year that I do have slight memories of, but I really need to revisit it, and that's Ice Pirates. I remember loving Ice Pirates, but my memory of it is very scattered, and the only lasting impression that I get is the hilarity of a fight during a time dilation effect towards the end of the film, which even now I can visualise some elements of it as it took place. I'm going to track this one down, and I'm going to find whether it's still as funny as I remembered it from when I first watched it. A film that's currently in the pipeline to get a sequel or a reboot, one or the other, is The Last Starfighter. A story of a kid who plays an arcade game and finds himself recruited to fight in an intergalactic war, because, that happens. The simple premise makes way for a fun adventure in which we get to see the pioneering use of CGI on film. We'd already seen some elements of it in Tron, but this was the first time that it was taken to an extra degree, and all the ships and all the space elements were all rendered in 3D. And the design of the Gunstar ship is beautiful. Oh, it's a smashing ship. And the film taps nicely into the video game era as well. A sequel has been in the pipeline for a while, and only last month it was revealed that the rights had finally been regained and a script was being tuned. Am I excited? Yep, I'm excited. Star Trek 3. The Star Trek franchise continued with the search for Spock. At the end of the previous film, Spock had died. If you didn't know that by now, sorry, spoilers, but really, it was decades ago, guys. In this film, it appears that before he died, Spock transplanted his whole chakra, his life energies and his memories, into Dr. McCoy, and Dr. McCoy is struggling. However, there's also a life sign being picked up on the newly created Genesis planet. Could this be Spock? So, Kirk and the crew, without authority, steal the Enterprise and head off to find out what's going on the Genesis planet. At the same time, a Klingon commander is seeking the Genesis project's secrets and is on his way to the Genesis planet himself to find out what this devastating weapon can actually do. A lot of people say that every odd film of Star Trek isn't good, and only the even ones are good. You know what? I think the Star Trek Search for Spock is actually in the top half of all the Star Trek films, and I prefer this over the next film in the series. It's character driven, it's emotional, and the BBC TV edit when they showed it was hilarious unintentionally when they changed the term "you Klingon bastards, you've killed my son" to "you Klingon balloons, you've killed my son." Hilarity ensued. Anyway, Star Trek 3, Search for Spock. If you're a fan of Trek, obviously you're going to love it. If you're not a fan of Trek, maybe it's not for you, because it is more about the characters that you've grown to love. Philadelphia Experiment came out this year. Now, I watched this a few years later on TV, and it's a film that I've gone back to a few times, and I've even sadly watched the remake of it and the sequel, which neither are good films. A top secret experiment in 1943 to cloak a battleship goes wrong, and two sailors find themselves trapped in 1984. They find out that the experiment that was performed on the battleship was recently revived, and that's what caused the time jump and is putting the world in danger. So they set about stopping it and hopefully returning them and the battleship back to their own time. A 2012 remake, like I've said, does exist, as does a sequel. Neither a scratch on the quality of this one. It's a great sci-fi. It's almost Twilight Zone-ish in its presentation. Great sci-fi, great time travel use. I love me time travel. I do love me time travel. And worth checking out. And Supergirl. Now, on the last one, I talked about how bad the Superman franchise had got. And Supergirl gets a lot of stick. It's not great. I'll be honest, it's not great. But you know what? It's got a charm to it that I do gravitate towards. I do like the character of Supergirl. I do like the fun approach that they take with it. And it's not as bad as people make out. Is there room for me? Famously, on a podcast that we ran before Man of Steel came out, I was asked, is the room on the podcast where we were talking about all the Superman franchise, is there room for Supergirl? And I replied, yes, there's room for Supergirl. It's the room in my house with the hand lotion and the tissues. I'll leave that one there. I told you this year was quite a biggie. We're only halfway through. Can you believe it? So let's rattle through some horrors, shall we? So we have The Company of Wolves. Neil Jordan's film is an adaptation of a short story with hints of Red Riding Hood in there and additional tales told by Granny throughout. It gives an adult fantasy horror. The bloody werewolf effect are what drew me in my younger age, and the more adult themes of the story are what have left it as a favourite with, like, every time I've gone back to it. More recent visits have opened my eyes to the full beauty of the film, And this was the film that made me sit up and take notice of Neil Jordan as a director, and his product to come would still impress. After the triple bill of Stephen King films on the previous year, this year we have Firestarter, and it's proof that not all Stephen King films are good. Drew Barrymore is a young girl who gains pyrokinetic powers, and a secret government agency is trying to control her. King himself dismisses this film as a piece of trash, and for good reason, because it's a piece of trash. Watched it as a youngster, and I've never read the book Firestarter as a result of having seen this film and going, oh, was that it? Maybe I should read Firestarter. Maybe the book's better. I don't know. But I was put off the book by watching the film. Friday the 13th, the final chapter came out this year. If only. More would come. I'm not going to talk about it because by this point the franchise was just getting bad. However, what I do want to talk about are two films that came out this year that stood up to the test of time and that really stand out. So first of all, we've got Nightmare on Elm Street, a whole new horror creation from Wes Craven. Freddy Krueger with his striped jumper, his hat and his one claw bladed glove is an iconic image. And whilst the series as it went on became a bit comical and it was more about, oh, what kind of comedy dream deaths can he inflict, this first one is a chilling, nightmarish vision. And if you've never seen the original Nightmare on Elm Street, then get it checked out. Don't watch the remake. Ignore the remake. It's terrible. But the original Nightmare on Elm Street, before the series got a bit flippant and a bit comical, it stands well today, and it's still chilling. The images of Freddy stood in an alleyway with the light behind him, so he's silhouetted and clawing and moving menacingly. All brilliant images. Robert Englund was perfectly placed in the role, and yeah, check it out. I watched this when I was young. This was one of my early teens horrors that I gravitated towards, and I became a fan right from the offset. It's bloody, it's brutal, and it's Craven at his best. And also this year, Gremlins came out, Joe Dante's jolly Christmas horror that gave us cute Mogwai and 3 rules to follow, otherwise they turn into nasty little gremlins. Black comedy, but deliciously, delightfully scary at the same time. Due to the content and also reports of various complaints that came from parents in the US, the BBFC insisted on heavy cuts to drop it down to a PG, or it had to be a strict 15 rating. Not wanting to damage the film in any way, shape or form, the distributors opted for the strict 15 rating, and so a 15 it got. The 12 rating didn't exist at this point in time, but it signalled to the BBFC that if films of this ilk were going to be made, which it's supposed to be a kind of family horror, it's supposed to be the kind of scary thrills you can take some younger kids, but not the younger kids, to go to see. It signalled to the BBFC that the ratings might need another overhaul in a few years. It had been overhauled in 1982 from the old system of the U, A, AA and X, which basically meant that unless it was X-rated, you could take your kids to go to see anything. I saw some right shocking films as a result. It would be a few more years before the full overhaul would take place, but this was one of the films that made them go, you know what, maybe we need to think about some midway kind of rating. Moving away from horror over to comedy. Bachelor Party, Tom Hanks's frat-style comedy, doesn't quite live up to the hilarity that I remembered when I was a young youth, but this did have me rolling in laughter when I first saw it, and even now when I watch it, despite the fact that there's some proper cringe elements in there, there's moments that still crease me, such as when Brad, the despondent, jilted husband, is depressed at the party and is sat in the bathroom trying to slit his wrist with a razor. An electric razor. Does not creased me when I first watched it. It's still played brilliantly today. The film overall is just a mess. It sits alongside your films like Porky's, etc., that don't quite work in this day and age, but Tom Hanks's charm just about carries it through. In the similar vein of humour, but one that stands up a lot better, is Police Academy. It's another film that has dubious humour, and some of it doesn't quite sit right today, but most of it does. You look past it, you get a cracking farcical comedy about inept cadets led by a cast of characters who gel perfect together. The comic timings of them all is great, and everyone's really well played. Steve Guttenberg leading the cast. This film led to a whole series of sequels, it led to an animated series, it led to a live action series, and there's still rumours of a reboot, which keep me excited. It does keep me excited. I've unashamedly got the Blu-ray box set of all the films, and whilst the last couple of films I probably will never go back and rewatch, this one and I'd say the three that followed it all have some charm to them that keep me engaged. Top Secret came out this year, and this saw Zucker Abrams move away from disaster spoofs to spy spoofs, with Val Kilmer playing a rock star who unwittingly becomes embroiled in the spy game. Val Kilmer's debut film, it shows his comic timing perfectly, something which we kind of have forgotten about and we only glimpse every now and then and realise what a joy he was on screen. And the film, whilst nowhere near the perfection of Airplane, definitely showed that the Zucker Abrams team were masters of the parody. They knew how to place things without it feeling shoehorned in. They knew how to do visual gags in the background. They knew how to play with the conventions of the genre they were mocking. Marvellous film, worth going back to, worth watching, get it checked. Cannonball Run 2, Hal Needham and Burt Reynolds once again team up, and it's more of the same. It's another race is hosted, and a whole scattering of cast and crew all get together and race and do comic japes against each other. Dom DeLuise is in there, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Ricardo Montalban, Telly Savalas, Shirley MacLaine, Catherine Bach, Jackie Chan, Richard Kiel, Sinatra, and a wealth of other people, all having fun in roles or playing themselves just for the japery. Stunt fueled caper, what more do you need? The combination of Needham and Reynolds was just delivered perfection after perfection after perfection. And if you've never seen The Smokey and the Bandit 1 and 2 or Cannonball Run 1 and 2, get all four of them. Spend a day. Chuckle, thrill, great. Finally, kind of on comedy. Not that funny though when I rewatched it recently, but when I was young I was obsessed with Kelly LeBrock, primarily because of Weird Science, which I'll talk about another time, but also because of this film, The Woman in Red. Gene Wilder is obsessed with Kelly LeBrock's Woman in Red after he sees her do a Marilyn Monroe, steps over a grate that blows her hair up, and she struggles to keep her dress down. And this rom-com charmed me in my early teens and started an obsession with Kelly LeBrock. However, going back to it when I was an adult, I realised that the film is actually quite bad. In fact, it's not just quite bad, it's really bad. It's a terrible film. It's not worth checking out unless you're a 13-year-old boy whose hormones are out of control, because that's the only thing that I can put it down to. Now, the Star Wars films had finished. All three of them had been out. What more could be done with Star Wars? Well, obviously, the Ewoks needed a spin-off, didn't they? And we got Caravan of Courage. Now, this was a TV movie for the US, but it got a cinematic release in the UK, and I got the joy of going to see this at the cinema. And I have very, very small memories of watching this, because I've tried to block it from my memory. Whose idea it was to give the Ewoks their own spin-off, I don't know. Probably George Lucas. Because the guy would just do anything. It sucks. As a kid, it sucked. I mentioned when I spoke about Return of the Jedi that the Ewoks weren't that bad and didn't let that film down too much. I think it's because of people's memories of Caravan of Courage, and there was another film that people misremember the Ewoks being absolutely awful in Return of the Jedi as a result. And for years, I hated the back end of Return of the Jedi because of the Ewoks, and I think it was because this film made me hate them. Ignore this film. If you've never watched it, don't track it down. Just like you should never track down the Ewoks cartoon series, or you should never track down the Droids cartoon series. They were all very much a product of their time, and it was a time that wasn't even a product of its own time. One film that is a product of its time, but stands up beautifully, is Ghostbusters. Now, this film, did it single-handedly turn around the fortunes of the cinema industry? Probably not, but it is impossible to deny the impact that it had upon the world and the zeitgeist of the movie industry. A comedy with Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, Bill Murray, Eddie Hudson, Sigourney Weaver, and Rick Moranis, the great Rick Moranis. And it sees the supernatural on the rise in New York. It seems like a strange idea, but it became a huge hit. The effects, the set pieces, the comic timing, the banter all meshed perfectly. And as a kid, who didn't love the designs of the proton packs, the Ghostbusters vehicle made out of a hearse, the ghost designs, the Marshmallow Man, the funky theme tune, everything just gels together perfectly. And what makes it really work is that the humour isn't forced. The humour all seems to flow naturally from the script, and having like some Saturday Night Live as your key presence in the film clearly worked a treat. Well worth revisiting regularly. Even the second film, which we'll get to in a couple of years, is worth seeing. But this film, straight out the gates, there was merchandise everywhere. It was collectible. I mean, that even just the logo of Ghostbusters, you couldn't move without seeing it everywhere. Great film. Another film that stands up quite well and has gotten more attention recently thanks to a TV series is The Karate Kid. Thanks to Cobra Kai, this film is being revisited by a lot of people and being visited by people for the first time as well. It made every kid think that they could do martial arts at the time it came out, as long as you learned how to clean a car and wax on, wax off. It's formulaic, but you know what? The formula works. Why change it? And it's a great film about, overcoming adversity when you're put into a new location. Like I say, the Cobra Kai TV series has given this a new surge of life, and very deservedly so. Well worth seeing. Never-Ending Story. Now here's a film that I haven't actually seen since it first came out, even though I kind of remember enjoying it, so I can't really talk much about it because I don't have a lot of memories of the film. The only memories that I have are, well, basically the theme tune. I'm going to revisit this. I'll get back to it. I remember really loving it, and I know it's got a lot of love out there, so I'll go back and rewatch this. And Splash. Now, I did watch this quite a few times through the years, and this is another film that, as a teenage boy, it made me obsess about Daryl Hannah, for very obvious reasons. Splash's tale of a mermaid that falls in love with a human, played by Tom Hanks, at his charmable best again. It has a charm to it that makes it an enjoyable film today, even if watching it today, particularly on Disney Plus, means that you're seeing Daryl Hannah have a very hairy back, because they've done extensions to her hair to cover up some of her bum crack. It looks bad today, but the film itself overall is it's a fish out of water tale. No, it's like a modern telling of The Little Mermaid. Well worth checking. And we finally get to me wrapping up and just briefly mentioning the films that I've not seen that I think maybe I should have. We've already mentioned within that huge list the ones that I only have vague recollections of and want to revisit. But yeah, there's one or two on here that people are going to go, you what? Let's start with Footloose. I've not seen Footloose. I know of it. I know the story. I know pretty much everything there is to know about the film. Never seen it. Frankenweenie. Yes. I might have seen the animated version, obviously, in recent years. But Tim Burton's original Frankenweenie, never seen. Moscow on the Hudson, I've never got round to watching. Red Dawn, I've somehow completely overlooked. It is on, I think it's on Amazon, and I've got it actually bookmarked on there to get around to, but I just can't get round to it, and I don't know why. The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai. I keep getting told that I should have watched this. I get told by a lot of people that they're quite shocked that I've not. And the more that people tell me things like that, the less chance there is of me actually watching them. So, by all means, point out films that I've missed out on. But don't keep going on about it, because you kind of put me off, because it means that there's expectations that I need to live up to, and it probably won't, and I'll be disappointed. I'll probably get round to this at some point. And finally, Repo Man. Never seen it, heard a lot about it, heard a lot of good things about it, never seen it. And they're the short list of films that I've not seen that I think maybe I should. Maybe there's other films that I've not mentioned that you've seen that you think that I should check out. I'm sure there are. You know what to do. Down in the comments below, tell me what they are. Also, feel free to comment on any of the films that I've mentioned, or just talk about film in general. I love reading chatter. I love getting engaged with any of the conversations. Thank you very much for watching. Next time around, we've got 1985. I've not even looked at the list for 1985 yet, but if it's anything like this one, wow, that was an epic one. Stay safe, people, and remember, #SaveOurCinemas.